Before we speak of tariffs, oil, or politics, let us first remember this. Every nation, like every soul, walks its own path. Sometimes that path is lit by sunlight, sometimes it's shadowed by storms. But storms are not there to break us. They are there to reveal our strength, our faith, and our purpose. Today, we gather not just to discuss policy, but to understand a journey of resilience, of standing tall when the winds of the world try to bend us. Stay with me, for what you'll hear is not just economics. It's the story of will, destiny, and choice. Recent decision by the United States to impose significantly higher tariffs on Indian goods, amounting to a total of 50%. This increase comes in two parts: a general tariff hike of 25% across a wide range of products, and an additional 25% levy specifically linked to India's continued imports of Russian oil. The move is framed as an economic and geopolitical measure, aiming to discourage India from purchasing Russian crude and to signal U.S. disapproval of that relationship. The general tariff increase affects multiple sectors, including traditional Indian export strengths such as textiles, jewelry, leather products, carpets, and seafood. These are industries heavily dependent on the U.S. market, where American consumers have long been major buyers. The added cost from the tariffs makes these goods less competitive, potentially reducing demand and threatening jobs in export-oriented manufacturing and agriculture. The targeted 25% surcharge on the basis of Russian oil imports is a more direct form of pressure. The U.S. views India's large-scale purchase of discounted Russian crude as a revenue source for Moscow during ongoing geopolitical tensions. By making Indian exports more expensive in the American market, the U.S. hopes to create an incentive for New Delhi to reconsider its energy sourcing strategy. From India's perspective, this represents both an economic challenge and a strategic dilemma. Discounted Russian oil is a cost-effective solution for meeting the energy needs of a rapidly developing economy with a vast population. Removing it from the mix would require sourcing from more expensive suppliers, raising import bills and impacting domestic fuel prices. The tariffs, therefore, are not merely a trade dispute. They directly intersect with India's broader energy security and foreign policy priorities, creating ripple effects across multiple layers of its economy and diplomacy. Voiced by a former senior U.S. official that the newly imposed tariffs could have the opposite of their intended effect. Rather than pressuring India into reducing its engagement with Russia, these measures may instead push New Delhi into a closer strategic alignment with Moscow, and potentially with Beijing as well. The reasoning behind this warning lies in the complex web of India's foreign policy and its long-standing emphasis on strategic autonomy. India has historically maintained a diversified set of relationships, balancing ties with both Western powers and countries like Russia to avoid overdependence on any single partner. For decades, Moscow has been a major supplier of defense equipment, technology, and energy resources to India. This relationship has not only economic value, but also strategic depth, as Russian support has been critical in moments of geopolitical tension in the region. Tariffs from the United States that hurt India's economy could create political pressure in New Delhi to look for alternative partners willing to offer more favorable terms in trade and energy. Russia, already providing heavily discounted crude oil, could further deepen this economic cooperation. Moreover, if India perceives Washington's actions as coercive or punitive, it may strengthen its resolve to resist U.S. demands and instead reinforce ties with nations that respect its independent policy stance. This potential shift is not limited to bilateral relations. A cooling of U.S. India ties might influence India's participation in broader multilateral groupings like the Quad, which the U.S. sees as essential in balancing China's influence. If relations sour, India could find it more pragmatic to hedge by improving its engagement with both Russia and China, even if it maintains differences with them on certain global issues. This is the strategic ripple effect that fuels the warning about tariffs backfiring. India's growing reliance on discounted Russian oil and fertilizers, a development that has significantly reshaped the trade relationship between the two countries. Over a short span of time, bilateral trade has expanded from roughly $13 billion to about $27 billion, with energy purchases playing the central role in this surge. This shift is largely a result of Russia offering its crude oil at substantial discounts compared to global market rates, making it an attractive option for a country like India, where fuel costs have a direct and wide-reaching impact on inflation, transport, and industrial production. The appeal of Russian oil for India lies not only in price, but also in the flexibility of payment terms and the willingness of Russian suppliers to transact outside the traditional Western-dominated financial systems. This allows India to secure large volumes of energy without exposure to the same risks or restrictions faced when dealing with certain other producers. In addition to oil, Russian fertilizers are another key component of this trade, providing critical support to India's vast agricultural sector. Stable and affordable fertilizer supplies are essential for maintaining crop yields and food security, especially in a country where agriculture supports a large segment of the population. The doubling of trade reflects more than just opportunistic buying. It signals a deepening economic interdependence. With Russia facing restrictions in many Western markets, India has become one of its largest and most reliable customers, benefiting from favorable terms while ensuring its own resource needs are met. These flows of oil and agricultural inputs form a core pillar of the India-Russia economic connection, making them difficult to replace quickly without significant cost implications for India's economy, and without disrupting key sectors that rely on these imports. India's determination to maintain its strategic autonomy despite sustained external pressure, particularly from the United States and its allies, to curtail economic engagement with Russia. This approach is rooted in India's long-standing foreign policy principle of making independent decisions that serve its national interests, rather than aligning strictly with any one geopolitical bloc. In the context of Russian oil imports, India has chosen to continue purchasing crude at discounted rates, even as many Western countries have imposed price caps or sanctions aimed at limiting Moscow's revenue. For India, the decision is driven by pragmatic economic considerations. Affordable energy supplies are essential to meet the demands of a growing economy, support industrial expansion, and keep inflation under control for a population exceeding 1.4 billion. Disrupting these flows without a viable and equally cost-effective alternative would carry heavy economic and political consequences. This stance also reflects India's desire to preserve flexibility in its diplomatic relations. By engaging with multiple partners, including the U.S., Europe, Russia, and emerging economies, India avoids overdependence on any single source of energy, defense equipment, or investment. It also allows New Delhi to negotiate from a position of strength, using its market size and strategic location to maintain leverage in international dealings. Continuing oil trade with Russia is not an isolated decision. It is part of a broader pattern where India seeks to balance competing global pressures without being drawn fully into the strategic agendas of others. Whether in defense procurement, technology partnerships, or energy sourcing, India's policy choices reflect a calculated effort to ensure resilience against external shocks, while protecting its own economic stability and sovereignty in the face of shifting geopolitical dynamics. Now I examine how the newly imposed U.S. tariffs are exerting pressure on India's Make in India initiative, which aims to boost domestic manufacturing and expand export capacity. These tariffs target several of India's most competitive export sectors, such as garments, jewelry, carpets, and seafood, all of which have long relied heavily on the U.S. as a major destination for their products. The magnitude of the tariff increases makes Indian goods significantly more expensive in the American market. This reduces their competitiveness against products from countries not facing similar trade barriers. In industries like textiles and jewelry, where margins are already thin and price sensitivity is high, Even a modest price increase can result in lost contracts and reduced orders. With tariffs at current levels, exporters anticipate a steep decline in U.S. demand, with some projections suggesting drops of up to 70% in sales volumes. Such a decline has direct implications for employment and livelihoods. These sectors employ millions of workers, many of them in small and medium-sized enterprises spread across rural and semi-urban areas. A slowdown in exports could trigger job losses, reduced incomes, and financial strain for communities dependent on these industries. The impact would also ripple through supply chains, affecting raw material suppliers, transport providers, and other ancillary services linked to export production. For the Make in India initiative, which is designed to attract investment, encourage innovation, and increase global market share for Indian products, these developments pose a significant setback. The initiative's success depends not only on producing high-quality goods, but also on ensuring they can compete internationally on cost. By raising the price barrier in one of India's largest export markets, the tariffs threaten to undercut years of progress in strengthening the country's manufacturing base and its global trade position. Financial strain India could face if it were to halt imports of Russian oil, while also absorbing the impact of higher U.S. tariffs. Estimates suggest that ending the flow of discounted Russian crude could raise India's annual fuel import bill by between $9 and $12 billion. This figure reflects the difference in price between Russian oil and alternative sources from the Middle East, Africa, or the Americas, which are generally more expensive and sometimes require costlier transportation arrangements. Such an increase in energy costs would ripple through the economy. Higher crude prices directly raise the cost of petrol, diesel, and other fuels, which in turn affects transportation, manufacturing, and agriculture. Fuel is a foundational input in almost every sector, meaning price hikes could feed into broader inflationary pressures. Rising fuel expenses can also strain the government's fiscal position if subsidies or price controls are used to shield consumers, diverting funds from other development priorities. In addition to the potential jump in energy costs, analysts estimate that the tariffs themselves could cost Indian exporters up to $18 billion annually in lost revenue. This figure represents both reduced sales due to higher prices in the U.S. market and the possible need to cut prices to remain competitive, which would erode profit margins. For industries already operating with tight budgets, the combination of lost market access and squeezed earnings could prove especially damaging. The dual burden of higher import bills and diminished export income would put pressure on India's trade balance, potentially widening the current account deficit. This could lead to currency depreciation, which would further increase the cost of imports and make economic management more challenging in an environment already shaped by global market volatility. Now I highlight how India's state-run oil refiners are adjusting their strategies to reduce the risks associated with relying heavily on Russian supplies. These refiners have been securing long-term contracts with a variety of suppliers, both to lock in stable prices and to ensure a steady flow of crude, even if geopolitical tensions disrupt existing trade routes. Such agreements provide predictability in procurement, shielding the domestic market from sudden supply shocks or price surges. By diversifying their sourcing, these refiners aim to maintain a balanced portfolio of suppliers, including countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. This approach not only spreads risk, but also gives India more negotiating leverage when dealing with any single supplier. While Russian crude remains an important part of the mix due to its competitive pricing, the inclusion of alternative sources reduces vulnerability to political or logistical disruptions that could arise from sanctions or changes in international policy. Meanwhile, private sector refiners continue to capitalize on discounted Russian oil purchases, benefiting from more flexible trading arrangements and faster decision-making processes. This combination of public sector caution and private sector opportunism allows India to tap into cost advantages while building a safety net against potential interruptions. The government has been actively monitoring this balancing act, encouraging refiners to secure term deals while also exploring new energy partnerships through diplomatic channels. In addition to oil, India is looking at broader energy cooperation in natural gas and renewable energy to diversify its energy base over the long term. These measures are part of a larger strategy to safeguard energy security, maintain price stability, and ensure that the country's rapid economic growth is not derailed by fluctuations in global oil markets or geopolitical pressures. Now, a concern raised by economists that cutting off India's access to Russian oil could have far-reaching economic consequences beyond the immediate rise in energy costs. Russian crude has become a significant part of India's import basket because of its favorable pricing, flexible payment terms, and stable availability. Removing this source would mean replacing it with supplies from other producers, which are generally more expensive and often tied to stricter contractual conditions. Higher oil import costs would feed directly into the domestic economy, raising fuel prices for consumers and businesses. Transportation, manufacturing, and agriculture would all experience increased operating expenses, which could then pass through to retail prices across a wide range of goods and services. This would put upward pressure on inflation, eroding household purchasing power and potentially prompting monetary tightening, which in turn could slow economic growth. Beyond inflation, there is a risk of fiscal strain if the government chooses to shield consumers from higher fuel prices through subsidies or tax reductions. Such measures could divert funds from infrastructure, social programs, or investment in renewable energy. A prolonged period of elevated import costs could also worsen the trade deficit, leading to currency depreciation and making imports of other essential goods more expensive. The broader worry is that energy insecurity would weaken India's economic resilience at a time when it is seeking to sustain rapid growth and expand its manufacturing and export base. This could undermine investor confidence and limit the government's ability to pursue ambitious development goals. The combination of rising costs, inflationary pressures, and potential fiscal stress highlights why some economists view the loss of Russian oil as a challenge with implications well beyond the energy sector. Now I address the wider geopolitical implications of a breakdown in U.S. India relations caused by the combination of tariffs and disagreements over energy policy. One of the most immediate concerns is the potential weakening of the Quad, the strategic grouping that includes the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. This alliance is seen as an important counterbalance to China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region. If tensions rise between Washington and New Delhi, coordination within the Quad could suffer, reducing its effectiveness in addressing regional security and economic challenges. A cooling of ties could also influence India's diplomatic positioning. Feeling pressured by the United States, India might seek to reinforce its relationships with Russia and China to maintain strategic autonomy and diversify its options. This could manifest in greater participation in platforms like BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Russia and China have a dominant presence. Strengthening these ties would offer India economic and political benefits, but could also shift the balance of its foreign policy away from alignment with Western priorities. Trade and investment flows could be affected as well. Tariffs on Indian exports reduce the incentives for Indian companies to focus on the U.S. market, potentially redirecting trade toward other regions. Similarly, U.S. companies may hesitate to expand their presence in India if they perceive a sustained period of political and economic friction. Military and technology cooperation, which have been growing steadily between the two countries, might slow down if strategic trust erodes. This could impact defense procurement, joint exercises, and technology transfers. Overall, the strain on U.S.-India ties would not remain confined to trade. It would ripple through security cooperation, diplomatic engagements, and the broader regional architecture that both countries have invested in over recent years. Focus on India's diplomatic efforts to manage the growing tensions with the United States over tariffs and energy policy. Earlier in the year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited the U.S. in an attempt to address concerns directly with the American leadership. The visit included high-level meetings aimed at reaffirming the strategic partnership, highlighting shared interests in security, technology, and economic growth. India also signaled willingness to discuss tariff-related issues, proposing reductions in certain duties and exploring pathways for increased market access for U.S. goods and services. In parallel, India sought to frame its continued imports of Russian oil as an economic necessity rather than a political choice, stressing the importance of affordable energy for its development goals and domestic stability. Indian officials argued that these purchases were consistent with the country's sovereign right to decide its energy mix, while also pointing to India's broader diversification efforts in renewable energy and natural gas. Negotiations extended to potential defense and energy deals that could strengthen bilateral ties, including joint projects and long-term procurement agreements. However, these overtures were met with limited progress as the U.S. maintained its stance on linking trade benefits to India's position on Russian oil imports. Despite India's attempts at compromise, the tariff hikes moved forward, signaling a hardening of Washington's position. This outcome underscored the difficulty of balancing domestic economic imperatives with the expectations of a key strategic partner. For India, the challenge lay in maintaining constructive dialogue while preparing for the economic adjustments necessary to withstand prolonged trade restrictions. The experience also reinforced the need for New Delhi to strengthen alternative trade partnerships and reduce vulnerability to policy shifts in any single major market. The escalating tariff dispute between the U.S. and India is more than an economic standoff. It's a test of resilience, strategy, and the balance of global alliances. India's choices in energy, trade, and diplomacy will shape not only its economic stability, but also its geopolitical standing for years to come. Navigating this moment demands clarity, courage, and adaptability in equal measure. Good luck in your endeavors, and may your voice carry strength and conviction as you present this. Thank you for trusting me to help craft your message. Now go forward and deliver it with impact.